Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Cacawphony. I am your host this week, Wolf, and I am joined by.
I'll take this first. So I'm Nav, more generally well prevalent and known as Ezreal024 in the Ruby community. Because I'm a moderator over on the Ruby subreddit. I've been there for what, since 2016 now, I think?
You're in deep. Glad to have you along, though.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Who would like
All
to go
right.
next?
Hi, my username is the Senate. Otherwise, on a few other sites, I'm also known as Jankmaster98. I've been on this Ruby Discord Crow's Nest for I'm not sure how long. But I frequent this one the most often and do a lot of my discussions about fan fiction and the show over here now, because I think the community's nice.
And last.
And starring today in his debut, this is Indigo as I. I've been on this Discord for at least a year, just kind of.
Anything else, or are you done?
Yeah, I think that's it so far.
Sure. Well, glad to have you all on board, and for this episode, we are here to talk about Ruby and world building.
Righty.
With that said, I don't have the script. All right, there we go. With that said, let's jump straight into things and start off with a simple question. Do you like and enjoy or dislike the world building of Ruby? Who would like to take the stand?
I think
All right, go ahead.
I could talk real quick if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
So there's a few things I like and dislike. I think that one of the strengths of Ruby, I think, is the fact that from what it feels like, there's a lot that you can interpret and there isn't too much set in stone. And in some respects, I feel like that leaves the world feeling emptier. And in some respects, I feel like that leaves the world more open for audience interpretation. But you can feel free to, give your own thoughts about that.
That's interesting. Is there anything that specifically jumps out to you that you've interpreted personally as a route that they've given you?
Well, they talk about the various faiths as an offhanded remark by Glinda, I think, in Volume 3, or offhanded remarks by Crow in Volume 4. And to me, the absence generally of, in my opinion, some distinctive and defining things about various regional cultures or regional beliefs is something I thought could be something you could explore in fan fiction or in expanded,
Right.
an expanded universe, because I think there's a lot of expanded universes like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings where they sometimes just give you a bit too much sometimes, but
Oh yeah, definitely. But no, yeah, I get that. They've definitely laid the groundwork for some cultures. We have a rough idea about what goes on in Mistral, Vacuo, and Atlas and all that. But yeah, it definitely isn't something that's been necessarily brought up in the show too strongly. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Right.
I feel like there isn't anything I dislike. There's not a whole lot that stands out to me. I guess there's a lot of up to the fans to kind of fill in for themselves. So a bit, but I would like there to be something a bit more distinctive about what they have.
Okay. Nav?
Generally, just when I'm watching anything in terms of media, I tend to be quite a casual fan in regards to world building. It's not something that will really draw me into a show or something. So, for magic systems, I tend not to give too much of a shit. So Dust has never been massively interesting to me outside of world elements tied to it, like Schnee Dust and then Ironwood's resulting blockade. I prefer smaller things like that make the world feel a little bit lived in. In V2, I really liked when they went to the CCT and a lot of us in the discussion thread at the time like caught the 4 clocks they had on the wall, and you could figure out the time zones of the other kingdoms. And there was that no faunus allowed shop sign that everyone had been asking for that showed up in V5. Like smaller details like that rather than like the larger sweeping things are generally what I appreciate when it comes to world building. And I think RWBY does a pretty good job of that most of the time.
Yeah, I would agree. For me, I'm a little bit different in that regard, where a show can very much attract me and sell me on its world building alone at times. If you for a show, like, if you can sell me on your world, I personally will probably get way more interested and way more involved than I would have if you can't sell me on your world. Oh, go ahead.
I think I would agree with that in a big way. I think that a lot of... Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, you're fine. Feel free to interrupt. But
I think, Nav, were you trying to say something? Sorry.
No, I'm good.
I
Continue.
think like
Oh, go ahead.
the setting or like a world of a place is also like its own character in a way, because like Halo Reach or something, it's not like Noble Team you really focus on. It's kind of like the planet itself of Reach is kind of like you latch onto.
Environments can be something that are focused on, given its own character, its own history, its own dynamic, I think.
It can be interesting to see how they can grow and move forward as the story and the world around it adapts and changes as well to, what our heroes are sometimes doing or just what's going on. It can be interesting to see and interesting to get into. And for me, like, getting into that can definitely... I will tend to overlook things that, say you have lackluster characters or you have a lackluster story. I'm willing to forgive a lot more if your world building just has me engaged and interested in it.
Yeah, for sure.
To be clear, because people will probably assume this, that's not where I stand with RWBY. I think RWBY does have interesting characters and and interesting story as well. It's just I'm way more interested in world building more often than anything else. But
No shame in that.
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of strength given to my personal favorite author and my personal favorite fantasy book series is Lord of the Rings, and I think that a lot of the depth and the majesty and the mythology behind Middle-earth, and that there was a lot of care and detail given into that helps sell the adventure of going through the continent of Middle-earth. And even continents you had never heard about prior to reading the story, if you were going specifically from like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings to something that's even more intense, like the Silmarillion.
Yeah, I guess that's also what I like a lot about Tolkien's like higher just world and culture to everything, but like required to get the whole story. It's like for the people that really appreciate it, like it exists for them.
Also, speaking of the Silmarillion, while nothing quite compares except for maybe legit history books on real world nations, we are getting that like RWBY companion guide in a couple months' time. So that should be pretty exciting, actually, for a lot of world details. Because there's always been a ton of stuff that you'll have heard, like Monty, Gray, Miles, and Kerry will talk about in like podcasts or commentaries, where there's always clearly been like a lot more that they do have on notes and things, but they'll sometimes not be able to come up within the show itself just due to various factors going on. So I imagine that they're going to throw out a ton of things onto that they might not have been able to get to during the Beacon era or something.
I think that was one of the big advantages of the World of Remnant videos, which... Do you think did those kind of stop after a certain volume? We didn't get too many of those.
The thing with World of Remnant is that they needed break weeks to work on the animation because, the team is smaller, they had less of a budget. And rather than just being like, sorry kids, no RWBY content for this week at all, to kind of like keep the audience along weekly, they could release these fairly small and minor videos with a little bit of narration on the world. It was like a good opportunity that they could take. But once they didn't need break weeks anymore, I think starting from V5, it's just kind of gone out the window.
Yeah, personally, I actually appreciated the World of Remnant videos, but I noticed a lot of people got kind of annoyed at them. They were all like, "Where's the main story?" Or like, "I didn't sign up for this."
Yeah.
Yes.
I actually used to straight up to just despise them, but I was also a very angsty 14-year-old. I was like, no, this is trash. I just want my actual Ruby episodes. But in
See,
hindsight, I did appreciate them, yeah.
so I didn't come to the show as it was sort of airing weekly, at least not until volume 5, I believe, is when I started watching RWBY weekly. So volumes 1, 2, and 3, I was able to binge. And I thought the World of Remnant videos were very interesting in and of themselves and could really, you know, give more history and more life to this world you were seeing the characters go through.
Mhm.
So I guess maybe that's a different
Wait,
perspective too.
Since you brought it up, let's deviate a little bit from our list of questions here. Would you like to see World of Remnant make a return?
Yeah, definitely.
I think it'd be cool in the off season.
Mhm.
Personally, I'd like to see it whenever, whether on the off season or to interspace people and give them breaks, because there are sometimes,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
nice to have a break.
Recently, what with talk about RT production cycles, maybe bringing back some break weeks might be a good move.
Mhm.
But that's not really
Yeah, I
information
think
that we're
That's off
eligible to
topic, I
talk
A
guess.
little
about.
bit, yeah. So, moving right along then, is there any, particular thing about the franchise as a whole in terms of world building that's really stuck out to you as a thing that you enjoyed? That you just really got into this particular piece of world building from, whether it comes from the show itself, the mangas, After the Fall novel, anything that just really stands out to you as, I really liked this piece of world building?
it's like
Well,
the fairy tales from the main show, because like on a whole lot of like old folktale, and so I guess like having mythos within mythos kind of
Yeah.
good amount of complexity to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
did
I've
you ever hear the tragedy of God, Ozma?
yeah,
What?
now that you bring it up, that wasn't immediately what came to mind, but I have definitely always really enjoyed whenever they've talked about those little myths and legends. And then, of course, like the recent few, like the year or so that we've had in the past few volumes, where everyone's just jumped back to that Pyrrha conversation and been like, guys, it's the thing she was talking about. It's real. That's always been pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Personally, as a history major, I was drawn to things that seemingly occurred in Remnant's past and what could be brought up in that respect. I was always interested in what was the Faunus Rebellion really like, what was the Great War really like, because that's a world affecting conflict. That's a 10-year struggle, the Great War, the war seemingly analogous to the war to end all wars in our history. And as a big history major, I like to sort of analyze conflicts and analyze societies sometimes through those lenses.
That's completely
I guess
fair.
it would be cool if they had like some sort of online course on their website over Remnant's history or something, but like I don't expect them to make that, but it would be nice to play around in.
Mm-hmm. So I'll pick out something a little bit more specific. Personally, I really enjoyed something After the Fall did recently, where After the Fall spoilers. Is that okay with you three?
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah,
sure,
Yes,
go
that's
for it.
okay.
Awesome. So for our viewers, After the Fall spoilers, if you've not read it yet, tune out if you do want to read it and don't want to be spoiled. But there's a character in that novel that has a semblance that can affect other semblances. But this character is also getting older, and with old age, they're losing control of their semblance. And personally, I really enjoyed that thought within the world of Remnant, how Remnant may not necessarily be capable of dealing with old huntsmen and huntresses getting older and possibly losing control of their semblances at times. Dealing with the idea of Alzheimer's or dementia, even. Like, I love that aspect and what that could mean for this world and how they treat their hunters and huntresses.
Yeah, because it's like a human element that we understand, but then brought into the fantastical environment, and then it impacts something like that in turn.
Mm-hmm.
You think
Absolutely.
huntsmen and huntresses have some sort of okay?
Would you like to repeat that, please?
Sorry.
Yeah. Do you think like huntresses and huntsmen have like a retirement plan that the kingdoms give them for like thanks for slaying monsters for us? Here's a 401k.
Has
Atlas
So that's
definitely
the thing.
does, I'd say.
I
maybe.
thought about the fact that huntsmen and huntresses are not government employees. They are not soldiers in a serving the state kind of way. They
true, yeah.
are private individuals who offer a service to, I suppose, seemingly local governments like the villages, like we saw in Volume 4.
Mhm.
The huntsman, you saw both Team Ranger and the huntsman who tried to protect that village.
Well, yeah.
It seems like the huntsman system, by its nature, is meant to be decentralized and isn't meant to be too closely connected with the affairs of state and military, which is why the Atlas system stands out. And I love talking about Atlas, but continue on.
I guess my take on that would be, as it stands now, I would say their retirement plan is, if you live old enough to retire, you're an outlier.
Yes, I imagine that's
probably
the case.
That's probably how it honestly goes.
Thanos, once you retire, you just go to your little garden and just
The Taiyang stress. It is literally what he's currently doing.
Yeah, just like that.
Garden and become a
Thanos.
teacher.
But to make everyone sad for a minute, it would be interesting to see this world kind of have to deal with. Like, take Crow for an example. His semblance is bad luck. He causes bad luck for others. And we know that he can, to some degree, control this, but it would be interesting to see, like, him grow old and slowly lose control of the semblance and people just not be able to be around him. Otherwise, something might happen to them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that'd be incredible.
Now you're
I still have jokingly said Crow should go to casinos and all the players around him would get bad luck, and the house could also have bad luck if you extend it to organizations, I suppose.
Depends on how well that works.
Which is another thing, the fanon can go wild with this.
Oh, sure,
and
absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
I do wonder if Maria had to pay for those eyes herself, if there wasn't any, because, like, as an elderly, Maria is an example of an elderly, retired huntsman. Maybe our main example, I think.
So interestingly, we still don't necessarily know why Maria was traveling to Atlas, and being that we haven't just thrown the character away, I'm assuming we'll see why she was, and like her glasses need repairing, and from what you can generally tell, let's all assume Atlas made them because they're kind of blue and techie and allow blind people to see, and Atlas kind of does all that fun futuristic shit. So maybe we'll get a little bit of a light shone on that next volume. We'll see what happens.
Atlas technology just seems so far ahead of the curve of the other kingdoms. It's almost unreal to me a little bit.
Yeah, Atlas is a really interesting nation. Like, out of all four kingdoms, by far they are the most interesting and well-developed one, just because they were introduced relatively early from Ironwood showing up in V2, and we've just seen all the pieces to this arc build up volume by volume, even in very small amounts. Like in Volume 5, Atlas did not have a presence, but the fact that they didn't, all of the agents had been recalled, Winter Schnee wasn't there. The absence of Atlas was still like an interesting tidbit for that year. And then that's carried on to 6. Had the focus come back onto them.
Oh.
And now there's V7. Sorry, continue.
My bad. I guess, thinking about it, they did quite a bit. And I'm just like wondering what they're going to do with the next volume, because like the cliffhanger ending that we got.
I'm sure. Well, going off of what we just talked about a bit, let's, talk about, is there any particular piece of RWBY world building that you didn't get as into, that you personally just didn't enjoy, that you found it possibly lackluster in its execution, maybe?
I have a love-hate relationship with Aura. I don't think it needs to be like as finicky as it's ended up being, because it's something that's possible to measure with technology, what with scrolls and the vital tournament scoreboards. But then Jean doesn't know anything about it, which I've seen some people like explain, and yeah, it kind of works. Then there's stuff like Sienna not activating it in time for Adam, and that's kind of like a shrug. I don't know why that would have happened. But in general, I do appreciate it because a lot of shows tend to give characters cool weapons and then they shy away from genuinely using them. Whereas Aura gives all
yeah.
the characters health bars to fight with just straight up, and then when it is broken, the characters are hurt appropriately. And I've always respected RWBY for going that mile.
I guess I kind of always treated them as the energy shields from Halo. They like
Yeah, I'm pretty sure RT have drawn a direct comparison to that before.
I think one of the things that I disliked, or maybe just wasn't quite sold on entirely, was sometimes to me it felt like in general there was a seemingly monoculture almost across 4 different continents and 4 big nations. Every continent ascribes to the color name thing. It didn't feel like there was that much. It's hard to. It's sort of hard for me to. It sometimes felt like these weren't 4 different nations. In the early stages, it was like it was just 4 states in one nation. Sometimes, I mean, they all spoke the same language, which is part of just conventions in storytelling. I mean, but
You stole this from me. You stole this from me. I too have a somewhat love-hate relationship with the color naming scheme. I'll admit.
Well, there are universal like human cultural traditions to some degree.
Right.
There are, but it does feel like, to me at times, when I first got into RWBY, it felt like my response to this was, this is a neat idea to work within as far as creativity goes, but at the same time, this feels silly in the fact that I'm supposed to believe that everyone past this point in time, all of them, no one does not name their children after a color. Like, everyone names their children after a color, bar none. There is no,
they've gotten around this
if,
rule,
ands,
I
or
think,
buts.
by having last names be related to color, and last names aren't chosen necessarily.
Sure.
yeah. I
And
guess like you kind of just think like colors by now
the thing
for
that
everyone.
sort of bothered me about it is I had to picture an idea that it was only within a span of 80 years that these seemingly massive cultural changes happened, because I would think at the time before the Great War, these 4 nation states developed very separately from each other. Most of them are continents away from each other, and they then fight this massive war and are then taken into this supranational, whatever you call organizations like the United Nations or NATO, and brought together under the vital system, which I assume is probably like along the lines of free trade, mutual defense, and all that. And that seemingly unified the cultures of 4 very separated continents and nations at a time when travel and communication are also hampered by the Grimm. So you would think settlements, continents, etc., would definitely feel more isolated. But
Well,
maybe I'm
it's
just
there was like a World War II or World War One analog, right? So
that's what I sort of felt.
Yeah, and if you look at our world, we've had globalization kind of stem from there, and similarly, like transportation and communication in Remnant began to improve from there. You had the CCT set up as deliberately as a measure by Atlas after the war to help with things like that, and just like inter-kingdom relations. And in regards to transport, that has definitely been pretty rough still, I think. I'm pretty sure every single time we've seen characters in RWBY take like any form of measure, like any form of transport between kingdoms or outside in the wilderness, it has gotten fucked up by Grimm in some fashion.
The only time was when Ranger made it from Vale, but that was off screen, so
yeah.
I don't know. I watched this one video recently, like explaining how from like super basic having radios and cars all over the place. I guess mostly there was the fact that they have magic for all the machines and everything. They have like instant access to just fire, coal, and anything. So I guess like Remnant has a lot of the benefits. They have just pretty much limitless energy that they have at their disposal to just realize everywhere.
Well, I
Probably
mean,
never
it's
have to
been
burn coal.
monopolized.
They
But yeah.
probably never have to burn coal or oil in their entire
Probably.
national history. But to me, that also makes me wonder, even if dust is so much more efficient, if someone else controlled the dust and you could potentially find coal, would you not use it if it slightly lessened your dependence on the more efficient materials, like synthetic materials, sort of? I don't know.
I mean,
Yes.
in that regard, we do have to keep in mind of an apparently shadowy figure and shadow organization that has been moving majority of the populace towards codependence with one another and co-reliance on one another, right? Like that is a part of the world building within this world where you have this entity that has been slowly trying to move the majority of the population towards, working together.
That is true.
So it does make some sense in that regard.
I'd also just say that I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the kingdoms being too similar to one another. Definitely early on, yeah, I got that for sure. But Atlas, I can't say this for certain because we haven't physically been there yet. Well, we've been to Weiss's house, but Atlas has always been pretty distinct from what we've seen. Mistral was rough because Volume 5 never really got out of the house. But, we have seen a lot of the... Mistral in general, you saw a lot of it in terms of the surrounding Mistral territories outside of the main city in V4. And there's generally like that Eastern Asian influence out and around the area. And I'd say that After the Fall did a really nice job of distinguishing Vacuo as its kind of like a very decentralized and individualistic kingdom, even compared to everything else on Remnant.
After the Fall
I
really
still
sets
need
up
to read
for
After
Chrome.
the Fall because I had so many ideas of what Vacuo was like, and then After the Fall would give me what Vacuo really is in the canon. I'll elaborate maybe if there's time on what my original ideas of what Vacuo was like in my fanon, but go on.
Yeah, I should probably also read the books too.
You should. It's fairly enjoyable. Moving right along though, RWBY has a very vibrant theory crafting element to it, and you've heard some of that here in this show already. To its fandom and its fanfic scene has plenty of fanfics that are filled with things that are about the world and very much headcanon. So why do you think RWBY lends itself so well to being built off of by its fan base for its world building? As well, do you personally see that as a good thing or a bad thing?
It lends itself well to that because it's what Monty full-on intended. Like he built a world he loved and wanted people to love it with him, and provided everyone a framework with which to create their own characters. And then there's like a lot you can personalize because a person's individuality is such a strong component of Remnant culture, like what we just talked about. Like you've got the color names, then you have semblances, which is directly tied to the soul. There's all the customization that goes into weapons. There's a lot of things like that, and I would definitely say it is a good thing because it's how you get the fandom like thriving, really. And you need a very active, constantly talking community to kind of get the message of your small little internet web series out there.
Yeah, I also appreciate like there's like people to kind of go off and make their own things, but I'd like to see something a bit more like distinctive and pronounced of each.
I agree. I do think that there is a lot of strength, and it is really fun to have these good foundations that are interesting to build on, but you can also build your own interpretations and your own ideas into it. There is a strength to having more concrete and more set in stone world building ideas like in other series, and there's also a strength to flexibility. There's not always a single answer that's right for a series, but I think what RWBY's done is pretty interesting and has gotten a lot of the fandom motivated, a lot of people interested.
And I think that this server is a very good example of that, if anything.
Absolutely agree. Well, going right along with that then, let's share some of our own headcanons and things that we have regarding RWBY and its world building. So these can be things that have since been proven wrong that you've thought in the past that again, that have been proven wrong now, or this can be stuff that might still be up in the air somewhat, and you wouldn't mind see, and you would like to see it within the show or see it become canon.
So I guess I'll start a little bit, I suppose. In my fan fictions that I've really procrastinated on, I definitely imagined Vacuo as a very probably different than, I still haven't read After the Fall, but I didn't think an anarchist society really worked, because that was what it felt like it was portrayed as in the World of Remnant video, which was for a long time our only really look into what Vacuo was like. So I
A
sort of
lot of
imagined
Mad Max
Sorry.
Fury Road.
So I sort of imagined Vacuo as being inspired by Arabian, a little bit like Arabian Nights, and there's various tribes, but I also imagined a system where there are no written laws, but there are a lot of unwritten laws. There's codes of honor that you hold between the various tribes and the various clans that keeps everything from splintering apart, and just open warfare all the time. I
That sounds really cool.
I mean,
Yeah, I like that.
you're not too far off from what we got, though, either. Like, it's
Just
definitely,
like
there are definitely some differences, but you're not as far off as you might think you are.
because like I imagined almost a mix of like a little bit of like the Ottoman Sultanate and the Arabian sort of tribes that I imagine, and it was like they took like blood oaths, and like an oath is very serious, and it was a lot. It was tied a lot to what I think would have been like spirituality or religion, a little bit of animism. I think I put into the stories that if Shade Academy was considered the only governmental central structure, that the people sort of had to create a sort of system by themselves, and it was like a mix of, I don't know, kind of thinking a little bit of the Klingons, but the Klingons are weird.
Yeah.
Well, who would like to go next?
I don't tend to be a huge headcanon person so much as I am just thinking of things that might happen in the show itself, things I would like to see.
That's
But
completely
as
fair.
far as stuff in the world goes, I've always just been massively interested in Atlas, just because it has been the kingdom we've gotten the most attention to from the get-go. And one thing that just really, really took me by surprise was that ending to Volume 6, where you had the Midgar-esque city of rich people floating all over the smokestacks and poverty below. Not 100% sure if that's actually intended to be Mantle yet, and that might have been like a soft retcon and moved Mantle directly beneath Atlas. I'd super down for that if that happens, honestly, because I love the concept of it. But it is just definitely nothing quite like what I expected, and it really paints Atlas on a whole new level compared to everything else.
When I thought of Atlas, I thought like the entire kingdom would be an icy military base. I didn't expect to see just chained to the ground like that.
I expected Atlas City, or at least Atlas Academy, to look like Autobot City from the old 1980
Oh,
something.
hell yeah.
Oh yeah.
It was just a fortress that could immediately just turn itself into a bunch of guns. But I did not expect Columbia from Bioshock. I thought
I mean,
Columbia from
you still
Bioshock.
might get that. Who knows if that floating thing can turn into a giant gun yet? Like, it's very much possible.
It's very much possible, and that's I joked that's the great chain of being from Bioshock, chaining the. I don't know if any of you guys have played Bioshock, but
A little bit.
yeah, a man chooses, a slave obeys. But I think it's I think it's very cool. Atlas. Also, the idea of that being the only state that has a standing army is still the thing that I find the most interesting to play around with in stories,
Yeah.
or just in international relations, being the only state that has the army.
And it's interesting to see other people's reaction to it who aren't from Atlas, because while we didn't necessarily get to see much of it in Volume 3, Ozpin talks about how a lot of people are kind of on edge and are constantly talking about this massive Atlas military presence because other kingdoms just aren't straight up used to that. And it's similar to, I mean, even in the ending to Volume 6, Weiss just kind of nonchalantly talks about the Atlas Air Force and why they're all hanging out up there, whereas every other character is just massively surprised by it because even though they have seen some of those warships in action, it's still kind of a very new thing to them.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of like Star Wars E, or like have their own like military per se. They just have like a local defense force. So I guess like a lot of the other kingdoms follow the same thing.
Not a centralized bureaucratic system that is supposed to protect the whole nation.
Yeah, it's
Rather,
kind of just like
very decentralized.
You do have some like weaker levels of law enforcement, like the Mistral Police, and then whoever collected Ranger at the end of V4.
yeah, but like there's I don't know. I mean, I kind of expected there to be like defense forces on the borders for grim attacks, but
because I've brought this up with Sierra a couple times, who's another user on this Discord, where I've half jokingly and half not jokingly suggested that the way to secure more territory and more land more efficiently is a standing massed army where you just mass produce a bunch of guns. But the culture and the system Ozpin, I guess, believed in more was the huntsman system and the guardians rather than soldiers and armies, I suppose.
So, is there anything else anyone would like that anyone would like to share as far as like headcanon RWBY world building things go?
A distinct headcanon I've had is that the Great War was the first big industrial war that the world of Remnant had ever faced. I'd
certainly say it seems that way, yeah.
Because it contrasts with the idea, I think, that they were fighting that war with swords and bows and arrows, like the animations from the World of Remnant suggest.
So,
and
to be clear, like to kind of give a better example, we've had World War One and we've had World War Two here in the real world. So you think the Great War was kind of Remnant's World War One, and that was,
essentially. I thought this was a war that had to be fought across entire continents with massive amounts of conscription. Crow mentions rationing of dust and food and supplies. That's a very industrial wartime measure as technological innovation increases.
But yeah, I think like when people realized, oh, my sword and shield just isn't going to cut it anymore. We gotta step it up a bit.
I mean, yeah, that's what ended up happening with Mantle. It used to be the main capital of Atlas, but just Atlas Academy started up as like an R&D facility for the war, and it just grew so fast and so large they just moved over.
Completely fair. I guess I'll throw in, for me, something that I've kind of headcanon a bit is just the idea of I kind of love exploring smaller offhanded things like the idea of medicine within RWBY, or the idea of doctors, and just the idea of like healthcare within RWBY. Like I love kind of exploring silly nonsense like that, and the idea of just stuff that just, again, as Nav said earlier, kind of helps build out the world and fill it out more and makes it more lived in. I would personally, like, I've headcanoned that as, how would Aura play in that? How would semblances play in that? And would there be stuff as the nature of, like, field medics, things of that nature? Like, are there, for semblances like, say, Jean's that could work in a healthcare sort of way, right? Like, how would all of that work and things of that nature?
Yeah.
As a small headcanon that sort of branched off of the Great War headcanon, I wondered if the Faunus rebellion was more of an urban conflict, or it was a conflict that actually had to set out sides and factions that fought over large swaths of territory. But we didn't hear too much about what that conflict was like, I think.
I think given that there's that history lesson on it, and they discuss battling over, I think it's like, is it Fort? It's definitely something that's like
Fort
it's
Castle or
like,
something?
yeah, it's like Fort Castle, yeah, for sure. Given that there are like recorded battles and that they talk about fighting over a fort, I'd say it was probably something like that in regards to territory where there were straight up kind of armies built around things like this, and the Faunus really organized their own militias.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot of tidbits that you could just chew on and wonder what more things, sort of. Sorry
Yeah,
if I'm not.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine. Like wonder where things go, where they could have gone, and just what is, what might be, and all of that. Like it's there's just enough there to build off of for your own self and what you think, but never quite enough to really come to any specific kind of conclusion. I absolutely understand that. So, moving right along one last time, let's finally take a look towards the future of RWBY and talk about a few things that we would love to see this show specifically touch on that it hasn't as of yet. Things that we would, as an example, this can be something that is touched on in the manga or in After the Fall or any of the RWBY games, if you've played any of those. Just basically something that you would love to see done within the world building of RWBY that we haven't got to see from the show specifically yet.
Well, we do have, like, you guys were just talking about how there are like certain details that you think on each show, and it's like what is actually going on here. Like, I want to learn a little bit more. So something I am looking forward to in the future is that companion guide, because I'd love to see like a whole segment on the Great War and the Faunus Rebellion and things like that, and start filling in little bits and pieces. Obviously, I'm super jazzed to find out everything going on about Atlas. And I'm also very much excited to finally get our first proper on-screen look on Vacuo. I think it is very interesting that the big first look we have had is, from this, a little bit of side content in this novel that has been very well received from what I've seen from everyone who's read it. Like, a lot of people love After the Fall. So I'm excited to kind of get to that point to see what they have done with Vacuo, because otherwise it has been very quiet within the show itself. There have only been a very few stray references, and we do not have too many core characters who come from there. So I would like to see Vacuo gain a little bit of relevance, I think, going forward, if we can.
I'd like to see a bit more of Vacuo too.
I'd be interested to see if anything is done with the fact that one continent is entirely undetailed as far as I can, at least in major detail, which is that dragon-looking continent. I mean, one, it's a cool-looking continent.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
First of all. And two, there are no. I mean, I think in one map there were towers on.
Yes, for the
that
CCT
continent,
one.
but we don't know who claims that territory, who
It's
who runs it.
That's where
And
Salem is, correct? Like where
yeah.
Evernight and all that. But that's
Yeah.
not fact yet.
I wasn't
It
sure.
is not
I think that
fact.
was assumed, but I never saw anything.
Yeah, I think that was just kind of assumed by a lot of the people.
Yeah, it tends to be the common assumption, but it's so interesting that they bring up that world map so many times, and it's like, here's all the 4 kingdoms. There's Menagerie in the corner. Here's a dragon. They have never once talked about it. There's no name for that continent in that CCT World of Remnant. You can see like 3 little relay towers on the very southern coast. It doesn't go far into the dragon continent itself. And no one's ever brought it up in the show, but it's just staring you in the face every time, and I want to know what's going on with it.
In one of my fanfics, I actually made it where along the coast there was this small, very isolationist kingdom that I made based off of 18th century Sweden when I was big into Sabaton and Cowerless Rex. And I think one thing like I said, like you said, the companion book would be interesting. I'm kind of interested to see if we're going to get an official scale on the map. Just a simple thing telling us how many kilometers wide or how many miles wide for those of us who use imperial units like I do. Just what are the distances kind of involved in these kingdoms? Because, some people will like assume Vale is like the size of a giant city state, because I remember there was a Reddit post about that, like how big is Vale approximately, based off comparing the world map and Roman's map. So
is Remnant flat or is it round? How much
I
ocean
I
is
think we
there?
know it's around.
I swear
Oh,
they
the
show a
donut.
globe in one scene where
Yeah.
it like shows just the
We've seen like
circle.
curvature, I think.
Twist, it's a donut.
I'd be down for that.
They could do it.
So
There's nothing to stop them. There's nothing that says Remnant is anything like Earth, geographically, tectonically, etc., etc.
except that they have a
Technically,
moon
yeah.
that somehow still works even though it's broken.
Have half a
Magic.
moon.
Half a moon.
Half a moon. Um, Something I'm actually really interested in seeing personally from either the companion guide or from the show itself. I'd be really interested in seeing, since we're going to Atlas, more on aura and semblances and
Mm.
how they've possibly explored that as far as technology goes and science goes. I would love
I
to
bel
learn more about that.
I believe it was said at RTX this year that they're going to delve a little bit deeper into semblances in the upcoming volume and not necessarily introduce or retcon anything, but just really properly explain some things that were always in place, but probably not explained as well as they could have been.
I'd
I'm
imagine,
happy
yeah,
for
they'd
that.
probably do it in Atlas because, like, I'd imagine that they kind of obsess over.
Atlas does kind of seem the place that would explore something like that, and I think it
Yeah.
I've
would make
always
sense.
said if Atlas can make giant robots and make robot girls, could they also do genetics and clones? Could they have a clone army someplace? I don't know what they could be cooking up in those mad science labs. But in a more serious note, I've also wondered how exactly do the governments of Remnant elect those counselors anyway? So,
learning more
like,
about
how
how the
democratic
different,
is Remnant?
yeah, learning
You
more
know?
about how the different government systems work and all that within Remnant. Yeah, that'd be interesting to learn about too. And definitely
I
a
think
thing
it's something
that's
that
for
would
the
be
companion
explored
guide.
more in side content than in the show itself, unless it became super important that someone did or did not win an election so that the support to fight Salem could be garnered. But who knows? Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. That's what this part of the show is for. Anything else anyone would like to
They
share?
did they ever like go over what kind of government Vale and Mistral has, or
Vale, Vale has that mysterious council that Ozpin answers to every now and then, who
oh
tell him to
yeah,
fuck off. And I'm pretty sure that's how that's handled. And I believe Leo also talks about a council when they're trying to like rally up a force to go take on the bandit camp, and he's saying that they need more time for whatever, and Crow's telling him to fuck off because he wants to go now.
yes, each kingdom kind of has its own sort of oligarchy system.
I suppose so, yeah.
Any last thoughts?
No, we're good from there.
Senate brought up Penny just as a thing for Atlas, and Penny's always been a really interesting character to me because the existence of her is more relevant to the story than Penny herself. Because like Penny did not really amount to much, which sounds very rude, but no, she was just like a chipper girl who was friends of Ruby. But then she died and was revealed to the world that she is like a synthetic weapon, so to speak, disguised as a little girl.
As a teenage robot.
Yeah.
I thought there'd be a lot more people kind of talking about amongst us that has like aura and everything. I think
Yeah,
it'll kind of
but
like freak people out a bit.
I mean, it might have been. It's just we're following our heroes along rather than innocent people watching on like the news or whatever. But yeah, just the fact that Atlas is working on that has been such an interesting thing. It's practically guaranteed we're going to see that Penny plotline come back up now that we're entering Atlas. And I do like the idea some people have thrown around that part of Penny's creation involved the relic, because Atlas does have the creation one, and obviously this is such a huge key thing for the show right now.
One last thing I think I could add is something I've enjoyed seeing the show do quite a bit more of and quite a little bit and get better at as time has gone on with each of the different volumes is their soft world building. And this is stuff that you can kind of see going on in the background. Like, say, we have an instance of Yang who's watching the news, and we learn a little bit about the attack on Vale and Beacon, and the fall of Beacon and all that through that little news section that Yang watches. Right, I would enjoy seeing more of that. Right, as time goes on within Volume 7 and other volumes in the future as well.
Yeah,
how the rest of the world is acting and reacting to everything that's going on. Like, we know the fall of Beacon, all right, and we've heard bits and pieces here and there of how Mistral had to react and how Leo goes into like, hey, the fall of Beacon was really bad for all of us, not just the people in Vale. Here's why. And he kind of just talks a bit about that to Crow. Like, I love stuff like that. Again, it builds the world, it fleshes it out more, and it shows that while, yeah, we're following the heroes, our main heroes and all of that, there is still stuff going on with this within this world and what's happening, and the things that are happening does affect the world by and large. And I enjoy that the show is going into more of that and giving us more of that, and I hope they continue to do so for the future.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of Lisa Lavender is kind of like the surrogate for just the general populace.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that brings up an interesting point, which might have been something that I was disappointed in, or I don't know if anyone else noticed it, but did it feel like Ironwood's dust embargo, which was done in volume 4, I believe?
Uh-huh.
Did you see any effects of it tangibly necessarily in volumes 5 or 6? Because to me, that's not just a dust embargo. From what I remember, it was a general stoppage of free trade that normally would flow between Atlas and Mistral, which would theoretically like crash a bunch of economies, wouldn't it? I'm not sure.
I mean, I guess
like
you could say Volume 6's big,
the border event at Argus.
their big, Volume 6's kind of big climax is all about the idea of, the blockade, in the fact that no one can travel to Atlas freely, thanks to, the Atlas military at Argus stopping that. Like, you can kind of say their big climactic end was based all on that, but that's about the only major example we kind of see. Like, we don't see any kind of soft world building in so much as how it hurts things. Though granted,
a lot of the things we saw kind of focused on the main cast.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get to see a lot from like people's perspective.
It is
like
also
maybe in the background you could have seen a dust shop closing down because their suppliers are in Atlas or something. Like in the background you see a guy nailing
interestingly, Pilot Boy was illegally smuggling dust along, so that's clearly been like an emerging market.
That's true.
Yeah, that is something. And also it's worth pointing out that, we are in Argus, a place that is, I would say, majority controlled by Atlas, right? So
yeah,
they're probably not going to be as affected by the blockade as, say, Vale might be, or Vacuo might be.
Right. It was also volume 5. We were mostly in Mistral City, but then we also never left the house, so
yeah.
It's hard to really gauge things with that one, unfortunately.
But yeah, overall still a good, thing. Just maybe little things I might have added, but yeah, I don't.
Well, is any last minute thoughts anyone would like to add?
Not off the top of my head.
Not really, no.
All right. Well, if that's everything, that has been all for the Cacophony this episode. We hope you enjoyed. And if you want to get in touch with anyone on the show and you would like to hang out with some other amazing people from, this podcast, as well as just in general, go check out the Crow's Nest Discord. You will find a link to which in the description below the video, and you can find a link to it on the channel description page for the YouTube channel as well. I have been your host this week, Wolf. And I've been joined by...
I am the Senate.
Not yet. But yeah, I'm Nev. I've had a lovely time. This is a super fun talk. I've enjoyed myself a lot. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is Indigo. It was nice talking to you guys.
And until
if
next
you guys
time...
If you guys ever want to hear me sing songs I wrote for the Great War of RWBY, hit me up.
Oh dear. As of that, this has been all for us. We hope you've enjoyed, and until next time, take care.